Hello and welcome to another edition of Proselytize or Apostatize Raw. I am your host, David Russell, along with my co-host, David Paulman. What's up, David?
Doing good. What's up, Russell?
Nothing much, man. So we got Evan Minton on again of Cerebral Faith. Evan, say hi.
Hi.
Nice. So, yeah, we know Evan pretty well now, but just for those that don't know him, Evan, why don't you tell us just a quick snippet about yourself?
Yeah, well, I run an internet ministry called Cerebral Faith, and originally it started off as a blog back in 2012, cerebralfaith.blogspot.com, and I would upload a blog post about arguments for God's existence and other typical apologetic stuff every now and then. But it's really grown since then, and now it's become a podcast and a YouTube channel, and it's a blog, and there's a whole bunch of different categories on there. And, people have been reading the blog and listening to the podcast, and they've been sending me in a lot of questions. And I have a question and answer blog post type thing like William Lane Craig does on his question of the week. And I've been getting a lot of that, and so really happy to be a part of helping believers, equip them, helping them build their faith, show them that Christianity is an intellectually satisfying worldview, and I've even won some converts over. So I'm really happy that God is using me to help people, both believers and unbelievers.
Yeah, well, I'm grateful for you, Evan, for doing all that type of stuff, because we all know that David Paulman over here, he just sticks to the Calvinist Arminian. At least somebody's winning converts.
I'm keeping the ones that we win from getting sucked into the cult, man.
Yeah.
I hear you.
Calvinists don't win converts. They pull off of the people who get converted.
Yeah, they don't believe in evangelism, right?
Well, some of them.
Come on, David. Come on. We're talking about hyper-Calvinists here.
Okay.
I'm totally teasing. But we love our Calvinist brothers. But, I was looking at the news yesterday, and I saw that John MacArthur had this letter he put out basically refusing the governor's mandate to close down the churches in the state. What do you guys think about that?
It's predestined to happen.
Yeah. I don't think that churches, or I don't think really anything. I don't think we should lock down like we did. I think my view on the lockdown was that it was a good thing. It was the right thing to do back when this COVID thing first started, back when we didn't know anything about it. We were, totally in the dark. We didn't know who was at the highest risk, what the death toll would be like. And so I think it was good that we sort of took shelter until science could kind of figure out until we could learn about our enemy. Now that we know we know who it's the elderly and those with compromised immune systems that are most likely to die. Those who are younger, they're they'll get sick, but they'll recover. And we know the type of safety measures to take to reduce the spread, social distance, wash your hands, wear a mask, and all that stuff. That I don't think a second lockdown is really necessary, and I don't, I'm kind of on John MacArthur's side here. I don't think he or anybody else should be forced to close their church at this stage of the game. As just everybody just wear masks, wash your hands, stay 6 feet apart.
It kind of should have been washing our hands all the time anyway, right?
Yeah, I joked yesterday with someone that as a germaphobe, as someone with OCD, I was like 2 steps ahead of everybody else.
Right on. Hey, David, what do you think besides predestination? And again, we go to the Calvinist thing with you, but let me see what else you got to say.
I mean, I take a bit of a unique perspective on how a Christian relates to government. So, I'm not a big fan of megachurches in the first place. But obviously, as an American, I kind of don't like the government telling people whether or not they can assemble. So, you have the right to do it, and I think it should basically be people's own decision whether or not they want to expose themselves to it by, going to a public gathering like that. I think it would be a problem if, like, John MacArthur, or a pastor of a megachurch, was like saying that people have to come, and that, you know, if you're not here, you're not in your place, and you're doing the wrong thing. I think that the responsibility is the individuals, whether or not they want to actually go. And, you know, if you're going, you should know that, you know, there's a possibility that you're going to get sick. So yeah, I mean, generally my view is the government should keep their big mitts out of it, but that's my
yeah. No, I hear you. I'm right there with you. I think it's kind of funny how the state can try to mandate a organization or the church when there's supposed to be a separation between church and state. They can force the church to shut down, but it's okay to go to Walmart, man. You know, we can gather there all we want. I just think it's funny, but yeah, I agree. I think government should definitely keep their big mitts out. But since we got all our introductions on, we're going to go into the friendliest atheist video here right after this this break. So hang in there with us, and we are going to have some fun tearing this apart. Welcome back to Proselytize or Apostatize Raw. I'm your host, David Russell, and today we are going to deconstruct a video put out by the Friendly Atheist. I've seen him around a lot. I can't remember his name. He's got a difficult name, but he was on Unbelievable a while back with Sean McDowell, and they were discussing some topics there. But he's got a big YouTube following, about 21,000 followers, and he decided he was going to put together some he's going to go through, I guess, Genesis, and go through each part of Genesis and basically say why it's ridiculous. So you'll hear that in the first opening part of the video. So I'm just gonna launch right into it, and then let me get my screen shared up, and then we'll start deconstructing it. Can you guys see it?
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. All right, so hang in there.
I can't hear it.
Yeah, I'm not getting any audio.
I know why. I know why. I know why. My bad, guys. Here we go.
There are people who think the Bible should be taken literally, that it is inerrant. Those people haven't even read the first pages. Let's just go through the first chapter of the Bible and talk about all the problems in it, shall we? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Obviously, we could talk about the Big Bang and how God didn't just poof us into existence. But even if you think, as some Christians do, that God created everything at once through the Big Bang, none of this makes sense.
All right, so does it make sense?
Well, I think it makes sense from the basically he's going to say why afterwards, why it doesn't make sense, but his arguments aren't very good. Now, I think David and I, we take different approaches to Genesis, but this first verse that he's going to talk about, it's whether you I take a non-concordist view. I don't believe that Genesis 1 is about material origins, that it's about it's not like the Big Bang Theory opening, you know, the sitcom where you have 14 billion years and 30 seconds. I believe that the Bible is talking about functional origins, not material origins, The days are 7 24-hour days. God takes that time to inaugurate the universe as his temple. And I can talk about some of the reasons why I believe that later. But even if you are, I think David Paulman holds the day-age view, even on that view, the first verse that he's going to talk about, it's totally plausible. It's totally reasonable to believe.
David, what do you think?
I think Evan takes man's word over God's word. No, I'm kidding. No, yeah, I would just echo what Evan said in that it's not a problem under either view. And I mean, origins, particularly, the origins issue I've looked into on like the scientific level with the biological sciences. But when it comes to like how to interpret the scripture with that, that's not an issue that I've given, as much study to as I think someone like Evan has. But I'm aware of several theories on how to do that, including Evan's, but it's not a problem. So that would be my view, that there's just so many different ways that you can take this, even taking it literally and not as a cosmic temple view, and it still is not going to provide a problem.
Yeah, yeah. Even the young Earth calendar day view. I mean, the first verse that he's going to talk about, at least, and the reasons that he's going to give to why he thinks it's ridiculous, it just doesn't hold. I mean, so at least as far as the first verse goes, yeah. But we can move on to that.
Yeah, we will. Yeah, I'm the same. I'm with David Paulman. I think more on the day-age view here. I think that it makes more sense on a theistic view than on a naturalist view. I mean, what explanation do you have for the Big Bang? I mean,
I was on this podcast debating that. I was arguing that Big Bang doesn't make sense unless theism is true.
Right. Well, just take the Lewis Wolpert view. Oh, I think it's a computer.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that was a good one. All right, that was a debate by William Lane Craig and Lewis Wolpert, and it was actually Craig really stumped him in that, and maybe David can put that in the description and have us see that. But let's move on. Let's see what else he's got to say about chapter 1 here.
I'm not hearing it.
Are you sharing your screen, Russell?
Yeah, I am. Hold on.
It's a good thing you're gonna edit all this out.
I'm gonna have to put I'm gonna have to play Jeopardy music over this.
All right. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As some Christians do, that God created everything at once through the Big Bang. None of this makes sense. God created the heavens? I mean, that's a synonym for the universe. So God created the universe and Earth at the same time, in the beginning. Except the universe is approximately 13.8 billion years old, and the Earth is only 4.5 billion years old. I mean, if you rewind the tape, they don't have the same starting point. And if you know anything about the early universe, darkness wasn't in the picture. For hundreds of thousands of years after the Big Bang, the universe was really, really bright. And where did this water come from that God was hovering over? The Earth didn't have water until long after it was formed. It didn't come with a built-in pool.
All right, what do you guys think?
Okay, well, first, this guy he's poking at an English translation of a Hebrew idiom. The Hebrews did not have a word for universe. There was no Hebrew word for universe. When the Hebrews wanted to refer to the entirety of reality, the physical reality, they would use this idiom, the heavens and the earth. In Hebrew, Hashemayim Waha Aretz. And so that's what they would use, the heavens and the earth. Secondly, even his claim about the English word heavens is false, be it in English or Hebrew. It doesn't always refer to the totality of the universe. A lot of people use it to refer to the sky or just outer space, not down here where we So this first supposed error that the friendly atheist seems to have found in Genesis 1 betrays a gross ignorance of Hebrew idioms. Thirdly, as I said, the friendly atheist is presupposing that Genesis 1 is about a scientific account of material origins. But as I have pointed out in many blog posts on my website and in several consecutive podcast episodes on cerebralfaith.net, we have good reasons to think that Genesis 1 is not a condensed story of natural history, but an account of functional origins, i.e. God declaring how everything will function within the ordered system of the cosmos for humanity. In a 7-day period in which God inaugurates the cosmos as his temple. And to see the ancient Near Eastern and biblical evidence for this interpretation, check out my 43-page paper where I go in depth in this, called Genesis 1, Functional Creation, Temple Inauguration, and Anti-Pagan Polemics.
And now
Fourthly,
hold on.
Wait a minute, hold on. Now, fourthly, I want to...
Okay.
But you know what? I'll just let David go on, because I think there's so much that could be said here.
There is, and you know what is funny is that we now know that Evan has way too much time on his hands to be writing 43-page papers on Genesis. David, what did you think about it?
I mean, I just thought it was interesting that he thought that, that the heavens, which I guess he was taking as a reference to the whole universe, and then Earth, taking that as a reference to, the planet, both have to have the same, origin point, that this is actually describing like the actual moment of creation or something like that, which, and of course, there's a certain way you could take it that way. You could just take that as a reference to the creation of all matter and all everything, and I think that would be perfectly legitimate. My own view on that is that I think this is just a summary statement of the whole thing that's going to follow. I would go with Joseph Wooten, my friend, on that. He takes this view that this is just a summary statement of what's going to follow. In the beginning, God, created everything. Heavens and the earth is a statement for everything. And then I also put this question: where did the water come from? Like, wait. God created it. What did you think?
Right?
What did you think I was going to say?
Yeah. And the funny thing is, he's trying to I don't know if he's just ignorant of the context. If he's not really just, obviously, as Evan pointed out, he's not really doing an in-depth analysis of this. He obviously doesn't know what hermeneutics is or exegesis or anything like that. And what boggles my mind is that in the first opening stage, and this is where me and Evan might differ a little bit as well, is the word bara, which it starts out bara, berasha, Elohim, is indicative of something new, something brand new. Bara is used there. And as Evan said, it's an idiom, but when you see the definite article with heavens and earth, I think it really is talking about the entirety of reality, space, and time. And I think you can draw that. I even asked a Hebrew scholar on this one time, and he said yes, that you could actually draw that out of that. So I don't think we're looking at, and the Bible's not giving us an indefinite time here. I look at it also as a hierarchy of creation. I don't look at it as like an in-depth detailed response to it. I don't think man would have understood it back then, obviously, but that's pretty much where I'm at. Evan, do you want to add anything before we move on?
Yeah, well, there's actually several lines of argument in my paper in which I argue that I don't even think that Genesis 1:1 should be translated in the beginning. God created the heavens and the earth. I think it should be translated. And Michael Jones of Inspiring Philosophy is with me on this. And Michael Heiser, well, I mean, he doesn't take a stance on it, but he thinks that that's a plausible way to read the text, that it should be translated when God created the heavens and the earth. One reason is, and I've got a lengthy Robert Homestead quote here. I'm not going to quote from it, but basically is that the grammar suggests that it lacks it has the definite article in English, but based on the scholars that I've read, I'm not a Hebrew scholar myself, but scholars that I have read say that it lacks the definite article, and that points to it being maybe it being read as a dependent clause, not as an independent clause. Secondly, I think an inductive inference can be made by looking at other ancient Near Eastern creation myths. I don't use myth in the term of not true. Genesis is a creation myth in the sense of the genre, not in the sense of a fairy tale. But in the genre, and when you look at other like Atrahasis, Enuma Elish, Assyrian Car 4, and even Genesis 2, you see this formula. They all start out when such and such, that blah 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 blah. Then it starts describing the creative act of the gods. Like, let's just take one example: Enuma Elish. You got a dependent clause, a circumstantial clause, and a main clause. When in the height heaven was not yet named, and the earth beneath did not yet bear a name, dependent clause. And the primeval Apsu, who begat them, and Chaos, Tiamat, the mother of them both, their waters were mingled together, and no field was formed, no marsh was to be seen, when of the gods none had been called into being, and none bore a name, and no destinies were ordained. That's the circumstantial clause. And then we get to the main clause. Then were created the gods in the midst of the heaven. Lamu and Lahamu were called into being. And so,
well, Evan, you
in
were
the case
just in
of
my personal space, bud. You were in my personal space, so you got really close to the screen there.
Yeah, well, the text that I brought up is
I hear you, man.
really tiny. I should have enlarged it.
But yeah. So just if you could say one or two things, just one thing within like 10 seconds, because I want to move on. I'm summing it up as you're saying that might not be a definite article there. I'm saying there is a definite article there. And the guy I talked to, the Hebrew scholar I talked to, said there was. And you can definitely draw that out. But what interesting enough is that I think we've both been able to prove, when you're actually looking at the text, that this isn't a problem, that he's reading it wrong.
Yeah, well, you don't even need to. I don't even need to rest the case on the lack of the definite article. Like I said, you can make an inductive inference. They all start out, when there was a state of affairs, then the gods started to create everything and stuff like that. But also, the term Bereshit is used in other places of the Bible, and this is John Selhammer in his book Genesis Unbound points out that it's always it's not an absolute beginning point, but it's a he says, let me see, an extended yet indeterminate duration of time. And the one example he uses is Job chapter 8, verse 7, which simply talks about the early days of Job's life, right before all hell broke loose, rather than the definite point of beginning for Job's very existence.
All right, thanks, Evan. We're gonna hit play on here and keep it moving forward.
The early universe didn't have rain either. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. Who was he talking to? There were no people yet.
I have to bring this up. I mean, because I have to bring it up because on the comment section here, people were actually getting a kick out of this. They're like, "Oh, you had me right there. Oh, man." And it's like, are you addressing Christians on this point? I mean, we believe in a Trinity, obviously.
Yes. Yeah.
Are you kidding me here? And the whole idea of, okay, where's the water coming from?
One thing I'd like to point out is the Bible never says when God created the heavenly host. He could have been talking to them. And Michael Heiser actually says that, this whole divine council worldview, like when it gets to humankind, when God says, "Let us make man in our image," Heiser says he's addressing the divine council sort of like in a similar way in which you might say, "Let us get pizza." You're the only one who goes out and gets it, but the other people weigh in and say, "Yeah, that's a good idea. Go ahead and do that." So God could just be addressing the council. I mean, the Bible never says when he creates them. So at the point in time in which this stuff is happening, I mean, that's who he could be talking to.
Right on. Well, David, what do you think here?
Did he just miss the fact that that is a plural?
I'm not hearing.
Did he?
Uh-oh.
Evan's got audio issues. No, but did he just miss the point that that's a plural? Let us make man in our image. Like, these are plural first person pronouns.
Right.
They denote plurality. Okay, you could say it's a majestic plural if you want. You know, I think there's a fine argument to be made for that. But if we take that, you know, just as an actual plural, then no, duh, yeah, you pretty much have to have some kind of multiplicity within the Godhead there. Furthermore, I don't think, you know, I think he's reading this over like simplistically. When I, you know, read Genesis, I don't really like think of God as actually saying these things. And you know, maybe he did, but I think this is more of like,
does he have lungs? You know, does he have breath? I mean, these are all products of this. So obviously he doesn't understand what an anthropomorphism is. You know,
right, and that's more or less how I read it. It's just explaining, you know, that God intended to do this, and you know, whether it expresses that using the literary device of saying, "Hey, God said this," or whether God, you know, I mean, like I had this one professor in school, and he used to say, "Well, this is how we can prove that Genesis is true, because scientists have been trying to discover the origin of the atom, and they found out it had its origin in sound waves or something, and well, that had to be God saying it." And I mean, I just had to like face-palm at that point, because God doesn't obviously speak.
Yeah.
And
I would also like to add that that creation through the spoken word was a common motif in creation accounts of the ancient Near East, like the Enuma Elish and the Baal cycle. And so that Moses could just be, you know, he's just speaking the language of the day. You know, this is what you did when you talked about your God making stuff.
Yeah, and you know, just to move on from that point, Dave, do you have anything else to add on there?
No, that was all.
Yeah, so I think there's a big point, and Hugh Ross brings this out quite a bit. And I don't want to not cover it, because I think it's buried right here in the text, is a perspective shift. We are going to that observer perspective, I think, and I think that you've got to incorporate that into how you're reading the text. I mean, at least I know for me, that's how I read it. I don't know about you, Evan, but I do. So I think you have to have that. That's very important. The perspective shift, because obviously he doesn't know how to read the text right, so it's like, you know, you will miss it, and obviously he did. So and of course, just like any other person reading Genesis that I've read that's a non-believer, they often ignore the literary devices of that of the people they're reading. For some reason, the Bible isn't allowed to have literary devices in it.
Yeah.
But every other piece of literature is okay.
Yeah, you know, Mike, I'm name dropping Michael Heiser, but he talks about how it's important that we have the right view of inspiration. Otherwise, if we see things in the text that kind of don't mesh with that presupposed view of how we got this thing called the Bible, using his words, then, you know, we're going to be shattered. The Bible was written by people, and they used, you know, their own motifs and language, their own writing styles of the day, and God was okay with that. He guided them toward the truth. It wasn't like, you know, it's not like the Old Testament just descended out of heaven. You know, right. God did not. He wrote it through a person, but he didn't write it like with himself. He did that once, and that was the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, and Russell, if I could add one more thing, because this just hit me. You know, we frequently say, if just like in everyday, you know, language conversation, if I'm recounting a story, I could say, and I said something, like I could say, and I said to myself, am I saying that I literally said something? Well, no, I'm just using that as a way of saying that this is the way I was thinking. This is what my intentions, my thoughts were. So we can very easily read these sorts of statements that way as well.
Absolutely. All right, moving on.
God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. God hasn't even made the sun yet. That's not until verse 14. So where is this light coming from? And how do we get evening and morning when there's no sun? Those words have no meaning when there's no sun. Also, darkness isn't a separate but equal thing. Darkness is the absence of light, just like cold is the absence of heat. Those aren't two different things. They are different amounts of one thing. God apparently couldn't pass a grade school science class.
Ho! So God can't pass a grade school science class.
Well, I would say to that. Well, first, he could. The ancient Near Eastern audience probably couldn't, because they didn't know what we know today, and God wasn't speaking. He wasn't being a science teacher. From my own view, this particular section, its functional origins, when God said, "Let there be light," I agree with John Walton that this cannot be interpreted as an act of material creation, if for no other reason than that the ancients did not consider light or darkness to be a material sort of thing. They had no knowledge of photons. So, for them, light didn't consist of anything physical. So, therefore, what the author of Genesis, he couldn't have meant when God said, "Let there be light," that there was light, that anything physical came into being. But moreover, I don't think light is really the focus of this day anyway. It's interesting that God does not call the light, light, and he doesn't call the darkness, darkness. What he instead does is he calls the light day and the darkness night. Well, why is this? Well, Professor John Walton argues that the author of Genesis is employing a figure of speech known as metonymy. For those in the audience who might not know, metonymy is a figure of speech that substitute the effect for the cause, or the cause for the effect. Light is substituted for day, and darkness is substituted for night. So what God is referring to is the period of light and the period of darkness, i.e., daytime and nighttime. What I think God is, what's going on here is he created the function of time. Time is what is created on day one. And so this answers his objection. Oh, well, how can he separate darkness from light? Darkness is the absence of light. They can't be joined together in any physical way. Well, right. That's not, well, God is not separating photons from darkness. He's separating day from night. He's setting up the day-night cycle. He's setting up time.
Yeah. David, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that Evan gave a good answer there. And kind of to go to one other objection that he raised about the sun not being created yet. So first of all, I think the sun did already exist at that point, and it just hadn't been revealed yet. I would kind of go with Hugh Ross on that. But even if you think that, that's not correct, and you want to, say that the sun doesn't exist yet, are we really going to be so puerile as to say that it's beyond God's capabilities to create a light source between that moment then of the creation of light and the time that he creates the sun? We know from Revelation 22 that God himself is the light, right? It says that there's no night there in heaven, and they don't need a candle or light of the sun. Why? Because God gives them light. So I think it's just silly to say that it's beyond God's capabilities to, make light. And of course, I don't think
I would say I actually think I know why the mention of the sun, moon, and stars are not mentioned until day 4, but I won't talk about that until we actually get to that part in his video.
Yeah. Come on, Evan. We're going way ahead here, man. Come on. No, seriously, I hear you, and as a Hugh Ross, student, I would say I would also go from this is completely this objection completely understood from it could be dismissed if you look at it from the perspective change, and you look at the observer looking up, and the Earth's atmosphere, we know for a fact, was not only covered with thick clouds, Earth's atmosphere at one time was thicker than Venus. Its atmosphere is thicker than Venus, and the only light that gets through to Venus is red light. Well, our atmosphere being 3 times thicker wouldn't even allow that. Just like Jupiter's moon Europa, the one that they say has water underneath of it, it's buried under so many layers of ice that the sun can't penetrate it, or the light can't penetrate it from Jupiter to cause any type of photosynthesis. So if you're looking at this from the spirit over the face of the waters, which also I didn't go into, our Earth was a water planet at one time. Okay, there were no continents. This has been proven. So I don't know what science class he's taken here, but we do know for a fact that the Earth was at one time a water planet. And the next thing you know, we have these volcanic islands. Then it goes from there. So yes, at this point, I look at this as we go from a very dark, thick clouded planet to a more translucent, from an opaque to a translucent, type of atmosphere. So I'm looking at it kind of like that. I know Evan's a little bit different, but let's go on and see what else he says about verse 2.
And God said, separate water from water. So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. God called the vault sky. And there was evening and there was morning, the second day. It took God a full day to make the sky? It's empty. What was there to make? And how did we get evening and morning again? There's still no sun. But more than all that, look at the language. God creates this separation, this vault, but it sounds very much like a solid thing, like a roof over our heads. But there's no roof. There's no physical barrier from the rain. It's the sort of thing you would write if you didn't understand what gravity was yet. It also sounds like a flat roof. I mean, God separated the top floor from the bottom floor. I mean, if the earth were flat, this language might make sense, but spoiler, it's not.
All right, spoiler, guys.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Evan.
Well, I mean, there are two errors here. The first is assuming, again, that the author of Genesis would have understood the sky as a non-physical thing like we moderns would. That's not the case. Second here is, again, his assumption that Genesis 1 is about the material manufacturing of physical objects rather than the assignments of functions. On my view, and this is the view that John Walton advocates for in his book, The Lost World of Genesis 1, what God creates on day 2 is the function of weather. From the ancient Near Eastern understanding, the vault was a solid dome, like he astutely picks up on. It was, and it covered a flat earth. This vault had windows that occasionally opened and closed to let rain come down. So an ancient would see day 2, he would read that passage, and he would say, oh, God is setting up the weather system, the thing that's, regulates how much rain comes down.
Yeah,
so
stable water cycle.
But a minority of scholars, like William Lane Craig, contest that the ancients would view this. They would not view the sky as solid. And if Craig is right, then that actually supports the functional view, because then you can't say that God created anything material on day 2. That doesn't fit well with the material origins. And the friendly atheist astutely observes this. If there's no material being made, then that kind of supports my view of that this is not an account of material creation. It's an account of functions. Now, I want to talk about the solid dome language here. It's caught by the friendly atheist. Now, he sees that as a problem with the text. It's absurd to believe that the sky is a solid dome that holds back cosmic waters and the earth is flat. Doesn't this prove that the Bible is not inerrant, that it's fallible, that it's just a man-made creation? Well, this would only be a problem if you believe that the Bible is contra Galileo to teach us how the heavens go in addition to how to go to heaven. But if God accommodated his message to the scientific understanding of the audience of his day, to the original recipients of his revelation, and if God's purpose in Genesis 1 wasn't to give a scientifically accurate accounting of how he materially manufactured everything, but what he created and why he created it, if it's about the who, the what, and the why of creation rather than the how and the when, then Genesis 1 verses 6 to 8 cannot be indicted with error.
David, what do you got for me?
I mean, I think Evan was pretty thorough on that one, but
Yeah.
no, I would say that it also seems he's like trying to take the most uncharitable interpretation possible. If you see
Yeah,
that he's not like trying to understand how could you see this in other than like this very cartoony way that I'm going to put it up. And so I think that is, I don't know. I always respect people who interpret the other position charitably, and he doesn't seem to be capable.
Not at all. Yeah, and you know what? Just to jump back on that, yeah, I do think it was. We see a stable water cycle, and again, going back to the Hugh Ross thing, Ross understands Genesis also in light of integrating Job, the early text of Job in there, and I think that's correct, and it kind of supports what Evan said about John Walton and on day 2, he's creating this water cycle, right? And this supposedly Job gives us 16 types of precipitation, so and that's pretty cool considering Job is probably the oldest text we have. That's if anybody wanted to debate that, we're not going to right now. But
that's outside my field of expertise. Anyway.
Right, me too. But supposedly Job is the older manuscript or the older tradition there. So we see 16 types of precipitation here, and I do want to hit on this again because he keeps going back about the sun's not there. What do you mean? We have day and night again. It's like, dude, come on. Let there be the word haya, is let there be. Doesn't mean that he's creating that right now. The let there be can be, like I said, from the observer standpoint, and you can see that the water cycle's coming, the sky's getting brighter, because the sun's actually starting to come through. But just something I wanted to point out because that's really getting on my nerves. All right, moving on.
And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. That implies that there was a time when water covered the entire planet, and then God mopped it up into one location. But our planet was never entirely water. I mean, there was a time when it had no water, so there was never any water to gather. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds." And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. Again, evening, morning, no sun. Doesn't make sense. But how do you make plants that bear fruit and vegetation when you can't have photosynthesis because, again, there's no sun? And how come the land has to produce all this stuff now? So much for the God of creation. It's like the Bible says he created land, then thought, okay, I'm done now. They can do the rest of the work. Also, by this account, the first living things in the universe are plants and trees which are above ground. That's not true. The first forms of life were entirely in the sea. And they were single-celled organisms, not complex plants with the sort of sex organs that would allow them to produce seeds. And God said,
all right, back to it.
Okay. First, I just want to... first of all, his whole thing, that about, God creating stuff and then just says, let the land do it, is so much for the God of creation. Who is he to tell God how he ought to create? I mean, assuming that this is a material origin account, if God wanted to directly intervene to create a few things, and then let nature do the rest. And in fact, as an evolutionary creationist, I believe that he did do that to a certain extent. But I mean, if he wants to do that, I mean, who are you to tell him how he's God? He can do what he wants.
Right on. David?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds about as silly as saying that. Well, I mean, it's like the assumption is that God has to do absolutely everything himself. So it would be as silly as, saying that somebody makes, not to exactly compare creation to a machine, but if you create a machine for the purpose of making something else. Now, suppose you don't need the machine to make that. Like, say it was candy or chocolates, you could make them by hand. Well, I mean, okay, but is there a reason that you can't use the machine to do that? It seems like a very silly, like, puerile objection that's like not even worth. It doesn't even deserve a refutation.
I let this one play a little bit. I let this one play a little bit longer because I think we've already answered a lot of the objections that he keeps rehashing. But there is a scientific one that I did want to note. According to Krauth and Kennedy in Nature, and also Struther in a article in Nature, they say that he was talking about there was stuff in the sea long before there was stuff on the land, and that's just not true. We've now found the fossils of ancient plant life, and they're like a half a millimeter long. But we found them, and we also found the isotopes that they were here, 200 million years ago. The planet life thrived before any animal life in the ocean. So there is that, at least on according to Struther and Carlton Kennedy in their articles. But I just wanted to highlight that to say this guy's science. He needs to update his stuff.
I was about to say that too. I mean, his science. I'm like, what year is his science books from? Because I mean, like the planet being a water world. I mean, that's been established since at least 2012. That's when I found out about it anyway. Yeah. But I'd like to mention that from my view, he objected to the whole photosynthesis thing. Oh, you can't have photosynthesis without the sun. Well, as David Paulman said, God, whatever light source. If God created like an artificial light source before the sun, that could serve as the thing to do photosynthesis. But if you take my view that this is about functional origins and not material origins, and what God is creating here is he is assigning the function to the vegetation. Their function is to bear food for human beings and animals. And so I would read the text like when God said, let the land produce vegetation, not that God is creating the very first fruit trees and plants to ever exist in a material sense, but rather that God is decreeing that the purpose of the land is to sprout vegetation and to provide food. So when he says, let the land produce vegetation, he's pretty much saying, I hereby decree that the purpose of the land is to produce vegetation. Seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, i.e., I hereby decree that the purpose of seed-bearing plants and trees is to produce food according to their kinds, and it was so. And the land produced vegetations, plants with seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in according to their kinds, i.e., the aforementioned land and plants are carrying out the function that God decreed. And then God declared that was a good thing. So it is literally true that God designated the functions of vegetation producing to the land and food. And as John Walton points out in Genesis 1, what we have on the first 3 days are the three main functions of the cosmos. Day 1, we have time. Day 2, we have weather. And on day 3, we have fecundity. Those three functions.
Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years, and let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth. And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. Finally, we get the sun and the moon. But wait, the moon is described as a lesser light. And if you know anything about the moon, it's that it doesn't give off light. It reflects light from the sun. So what is the Bible talking about? And the idea that the greater light, the sun, governs the day while the moon governs the night doesn't make sense either. It's not like the sun goes away at night. That's what toddlers think. And even though we might not be able to see the sun, it is still there. I mean, when it's nighttime for us, it's daytime for someone else. So there's no real separation between the night and day. It's always sunny somewhere. Also, if God made these two lights, where does one go when it's off duty? God never tells us. Also, the sun and the moon were not created at the same time. The sun is really old. The moon is not. The moon didn't appear until 1 billion years after the earth was formed, and the earth formed long after the sun arrived. And God supposedly made these two lights to separate light from darkness, but God also did that back in verse 4. So did he just separate light from darkness twice? I mean, did an all-knowing God get amnesia? It also says God set the lights in the vault of the sky. But the sun is not in our sky. It's not in the Earth's atmosphere. Remember, we revolve around the sun, not the other way around. These verses also say God made the stars. But think about that. God made our sun. God made the Earth's moon. And then God created all the stars? Do you know how many stars there are? I mean, I know people joke about how Carl Sagan said billions and billions. He never actually said that phrase, but there are really billions and billions of stars. So God made the greater light and the lesser light, and then, like an afterthought, made several billions of something else. And the Bible just glosses over all that in a single sentence. And by the way, the sun is a star. Saying you're creating the sun, then the stars, that's like saying you're gonna go shopping for some Lucky Charms, but then you might have to make another trip to buy some cereal. Like, you did that already. And if God made the stars to give light on the earth, how come we can't see all those stars? I mean, at best, if you're in certain parts of the world and you get to witness a truly starry sky, you're not seeing all the stars. You're not seeing billions and billions of stars. They definitely are not lighting the earth. And why are these stars giving light on earth? I thought God already said, let there be light. And I thought God already separated the light from the darkness, but now he's making light again? Like, dude, get it right the first time. You're God. And I thought God already created the heavens in the first sentence of Genesis. If stars weren't a part of that, then what exactly was in those heavens? If you left out the biggest ingredient in a recipe, you don't get credit for making the thing. It's also a bit ironic that God created signs in the sky, because that's something astrologers believe. And plenty of Christians say astrologers are blasphemous. If you're putting your trust in an astrologer, you are not putting your trust in God, and that's supposedly bad. And there was evening, and there was morning.
And there was morning and evening and evening and morning. Let's get after it, Evan.
Okay, I don't have a whole lot to say about this, because most of what he said can just be dismissed when you realize that God did not intend for Genesis 1 to be a scientific account of origins. He was accommodating himself to the the dome cosmology, the primitive cosmology of Moses's day. And this is an account of functional origins. And so all of these scientific errors that he thinks he's finding are not really errors, since that's not the point of the passage. But I want to note one thing. This is probably the most blatant part of the whole text, where you can see the functional orientation. And God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years. Let them be in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth." I mean, he's explicitly saying this is what the sun is for, this is what the moon is for. They're to govern the day and the night. And as John Walton says, these are functionaries. They're carrying out the function of time that was created on day one. Now, one might wonder that given that the sun, moon, and stars, that they're carrying out the function of time, and time was created on day one, why weren't they mentioned on the same day? Well, I believe, and there's a lot of Old Testament scholars who would agree with me on this, that what we have here is an anti-pagan polemic. In other words, Moses, or whoever you think authored Genesis, was taking jabs at the pagan religions of his day. It's very well documented that ancient peoples believed that the stars, and especially the sun and the moon, were not burning balls of gas like we know that they are. They were deities. They were divine entities in themselves. And in fact, you know how the Friendly Atheist says that the stars were just kind of mentioned as an afterthought? Yet that was intentional. The writer of Genesis did that on purpose because the ancients believed that these were gods. As a polemic against the religion of Moses' day, he not only not names the sun and the moon, he calls them greater light and lesser light. And this is because the Hebrew words for sun and moon were the names of pagan deities. But the rest of the pagan pantheon, i.e. the stars, he just relegates them to a parenthetical note. Oh yeah, God made these things in the sky also. He made the stars. He made those also. What a spit in the eye to those who worship the celestial bodies as deities. Number one, they're not mentioned until the creation account is halfway over. And they're not even mentioned by name. They're not even worth naming. You know, greater light, lesser night, yeah, and the stars.
All right, Mr. Serious Paulman over there. What do you got for me, man?
Well, I think Evan got a lot of good points there. Let me just kind of take this issue of the moon not being a light in and of itself, because that kind of stuck out to me. I think he's confusing light with light source. Something that gives light can rightly be called a light, even if that light is just a reflection of another light source. So the fact that, you know, he goes on about, you know, how, oh, well, you know, the moon isn't a light. What he means there is it's not a light source, but you know, just strictly speaking, the text doesn't say that it is a light source. It just says that it's a light, and it's perfectly acceptable to call something that is reflecting other lights a light in and of itself.
Yeah, and you know, I wanted to highlight this point. I think Evan did a good job too. I think from this whole thing could be just brushed aside. A, if he got his science right. B, if he understood the text, right? So in the text, you know, we see that there's a purpose. There's like Evan said, there's a function to the stars and stuff like that. I take this as, you know, our translucent atmosphere has now become transparent, and we can see that, you know, this reality that and again the Hayah is used, so the let there be. So yeah, he's allowing the sky to clear up what was already there. So I mean, I don't see it as let there be as another creation event, but as a letting there be, as, you know, let it shine on the earth. Why? Because if you know anything about science and animals, the whole cycle, the earth cycle, and, you know, the stars, the moon, everything plays a part on regulating bodies and complex animals. You know, they use that to regulate their functions. So there's this where he gets the science wrong. It's nothing to do with astrologers, and that's bad. No, God put the stuff in there so it could have a specific function, as Evan pointed out.
Yeah, and what I would want to say with regards to that whole sign language, that the signs were not, you know, it's not astrology, it's timekeeping. It's like, you know, they knew what time of year it was based on what was going up in the heavens.
Yep.
The fourth day. Well, at least we have a sun now. It took 4 days to get the actual first day. And God said, let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky. So God created the great creatures of the sea and every living thing with which the water teems and that moves about in it, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the water in the seas and let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. Again, God didn't even make those creatures. He let the water do it. How lazy can you be? But if you look at this timeline, I mean, God made living creatures after he made plants. That's not right. That's not what the fossil record shows, or any other piece of evidence. It's the other way around. And God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds. The livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, and the wild animals, each according to its kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. God didn't make these creatures either. He let the land do it. Lazy. But if we're talking about creatures that move along the ground, I mean insects, reptiles, things like that, they were around for hundreds of millions of years before those other wild animals. And they all originated in the sea, not the land. Also, livestock, I mean, we domesticated cattle. They never lived in the wild. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." Let us make mankind? Who's us? Who else is hanging out with God doing all this? Are there other gods he's not telling us about? And how do we get...
Oh my gosh. Well, there's so much to unpack. He gets so much. First, I want to comment on day 5. Again, this is no problem if you are not a concordist like I am, and you believe that God was, he was just speaking the language. He was communicating theological truths to ancient peoples of a pre-scientific mindset. On my view, on day 5, God, the functionaries simply carry out their own functionaries in the cosmic space that they inhabit, unlike the functionaries on day 4, which help accomplish the functions associated in the sphere that they inhabit. The Bible talks about what these critters do rather than the roles that they serve. Fish teem in the waters, birds fly high in the sky, but even though the primary focus of the sea creatures and sky creatures is said to teem in the waters and fly in the sky, notice that a functional assignment is not absent from the text. The passage goes on to describe God assigning the fish and birds functions. What's the function? To be fruitful and multiply. God wants a functioning ecosystem. He wants the world to be inhabited. He said that's that it's not limited to that, the functions, but that's specifically the function that the text points out. And as far as day 6, let me just skip ahead to when God said, "Let us create man in our image." I've already talked about, Michael Heiser talks about this in the Unseen Realm. Number 1, there are other gods with a lowercase g. These are spiritual entities who are ex-Divine Council members. Well, some of them are still members of the Divine Council, but the ones that are ex-Divine Council members, they rebelled and they became the gods of the nations. And Psalm 82 talks about their judgment. But Heiser in the Unseen Realm, he says that God could very well be talking to other persons of the Divine Council and saying, "Hey, I'm thinking about creating human beings. Do you think this is a good idea? Let us create man in our image." Kind of like, let us go out and get pizza. Now that doesn't mean that these other heavenly hosts are doing the creation. We're not ascribing any creative powers to any other being but God. Just like if you went out and you got a pizza, you consulted your friends first and they weighed in, but you did all of the going and getting. But and most Christians interpret this as one person of the Trinity talking to other persons of the Trinity. So this whole plurality language, it's just not a problem, and it really shows that he hasn't done the reading. If he is unaware of these interpretations of Genesis 1:26, then he just needs to do more reading. That's all I can say.
Yeah, David.
Yeah, I was gonna bring out this repeated charge of laziness. I thought was ridiculous. I keep saying God is lazy because he has the water bring forth the creatures that live there, or the land bring forth the animals and such. And I'm curious why, like, he didn't think anything else was like lazy. That if God, uses chooses to take something he's already created and form that into something else, or to use something, essentially use that as the means by which something else comes about. I'm feeling to see, like, what is lazy about that. Are you saying if you don't do something like directly, or if God doesn't create something like ex nihilo, like everything has to be ex nihilo, or it's laziness? By that logic, every single thing that we make, it was lazy on our part because we didn't create new matter. The fact that we use pre-existing materials and fashion them and form them into other things does not in any way imply laziness. It's just, I feel like he's trying to bring everything that he can, like throw all the mud and see what sticks.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, there's just and a few things I'm gonna talk about. Of course, day 5 and day 6. I think they can be read. I think there's some literary devices used in between there, but we do see bara, right? We do see bara again when it's talking about the soulish animals, right? So I see that, and I think he's kind of like ignoring the rest of the animals because he goes to the ones that are imperative to sustain human life. So earlier in day 5, Hugh Ross does this really cool thing where he puts 10 predictions that Genesis gets right? They get 10 out of 10. And in day 5, you see the oxygenation events. And what he proposes is that the Avalon events and the Cambrian explosion put a heck of a burden on the scientists and the evolutionary theorists on, it puts a heavy burden on them to explain that. So I just look at all this and to see what he's doing, to relate this back to him, to see how he's getting all this wrong without going through it. Like David said, he's just trying to throw mud to see what sticks. I'm like, dude, you're not even giving anything a fair shake. You're just being dishonest with all the information. You're just producing a video to get likes. Anything else, guys?
Nah.
Yeah,
all I have to say is that he ought to pick up books by Hugh Ross, John Walton, Michael Heiser, John Salhammer. Get a commentary, dude.
Yeah, and at least update your science.
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah,
but anyway,
get some new science books too, because some of the science that he was talking about is just way outdated.
It is. But okay, so for this last part, guys, I kind of fast forwarded it because I was getting kind of sick of all the rhetoric. But I'm just going to fast forward to the end here, to this last part, because I want to hear I want you guys just to comment just a little bit on what he says there at the end.
Increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. Telling 2 people to fill the earth is just wildly uncalled for. I mean, it really places an inhuman burden on the woman who basically can't do anything other than be pregnant and pray for octuplets every time. I know death doesn't even exist yet in this narrative, but still, give Eve some rest. I would so much rather have a God that says, fill the earth, eventually. But here's a condom if you just want to take a break for a bit. Then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it, they will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds in the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. If that's true, then why are so many plants poisonous? There's a reason parents don't tell their kids to run in the garden in the backyard and eat whatever you find. Not all of it is good or healthy. I mean, if anything, if all plants are ours for the taking, does that mean God is pro-marijuana? God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 6th day. Was it good, though? I mean, God designed a world where death could enter, and we could suffer, and the animals would turn on each other and become predator and prey, and climate change could occur. It's not a utopia, not even then. The word Eden has become synonymous with perfect, but the whole place was still a breeding ground where eventual chaos could thrive. God could have used that seventh day to create a buffer of some kind, but he rested. Thanks for nothing. There's a group called Answers in Genesis. They're the ones behind the Creation Museum and Ark Encounter that believes everything we need to know about our origins is contained in the book of Genesis. But just from the first chapter, it's easy to see that the answers are not in Genesis. There are only more questions. There are people...
All right, go ahead.
All I have to say is that I'm pretty sure that I'm pretty sure that that was a hyperbolic statement about the plants. About I give you every green. I'm pretty sure he just meant the edible ones. And if this was to Adam and Eve, as some interpret, I don't take this view. I think Genesis 2 takes place after Genesis 1. But if Genesis 2 is a rehashing, more in-depth form of day 6, like a lot of people think, then you could make the argument that he was just talking about the plants in the Garden of Eden, and maybe there were no poisonous plants in the Garden of Eden. Again, he just has not thought his criticism through. It's just it's really bad, and the whole the very good. From my interpretation, what very good means, and this statement of it was good all throughout the text is that it's not a moral statement. It's not a moral goodness. It's things are functioning the way that they're supposed to. The trees are producing fruit. The sun is shining. The world is turning. Well, I mean, the ancients wouldn't have believed it was turning, but you know what I mean. Everything is up and running. The cosmos is the way that it is supposed to be running, and now God comes into his cosmic temple and rests, just like gods did once the inauguration of their temples were finished. Now that God is done inaugurating the temple, the universe, and ascribing functions to everything, he created an image of himself and put it in the temple, like gods did. They had images of themselves right before the spirit of the deity came in and rested. That's what God did. Okay, good. Very good. Everything is up and running. Everything is the way it's supposed to be. I'm going to come and I'm going to dwell now.
Right on. David, there's something that I want you to specifically answer about the suffering that we could endure. And I hope that's where you're going with it, because this is your philosophical side. I want you to answer that.
Well, you can expand on that one a little bit more if you want, on like exactly what point of that you want me to hit. But there were two things I wanted to bring out. First was this silly idea that he thought the mandate to fill the earth with people was only given to Adam and Eve, and this charge to be fruitful and multiply that didn't apply to their posterity or anything. This wasn't something that humans were to do as a race, but this is something that Adam and Eve, just themselves, had to fill the earth with people. That is, that's silly. And we can see that throughout that, other people have the charge. Like Noah and his family, for example, are told to be fruitful and multiply. For example, when Jesus gives the Great Commissions to the disciples, right, to preach the gospel to all creation, does he mean that them in particular have to go give the gospel to every single person, individual, including those who wouldn't be born till thousands of years later? No, that's a collective charge. It's given to us corporately as a group, as Christians. And the same way, as humans, we're to be fruitful and multiply. And then the other thing was this thing about poisonous plants. It's entirely. Did he just forget about the curse? How we have things like thorns and stuff that did not exist yet when things were good, and that these poisonous plants could, very well, if they're not the result of mutation or something, could have come about is this like curse to fight that man's going to be fighting the land? Did he like just not realize that these could have been something that was added into the system after it went bad? And then just, on the issue of that he raised the potential of things going bad. So the problem of evil, basically. The fact that something has the potential to go evil does not make it evil. It's not evil until the evil is present. You can't say because there's this potentialities aren't actualities, in other words. So, yeah, I mean, and obviously, I would use a free will defense, a soul-building theodicy, that God, of course, did ultimately intend for the fall to happen. Not that God caused the fall, but that God knew that this would happen, and that he created the events of the world, including the redemption of man, to come about because of this. And so I'm not sure if you wanted a more detailed theodicy there, but that's my short answer.
Yeah, I think that's good. I'm going to concede most of my time here. I just did want to say something about the poison plants. And is the creation good? I think so. I think that even if there were poisonous plants, that how many poisonous plants do we see that we make drugs out of to relieve certain ailments, certain issues, or that have a use, or that the poison is actually a protector, to help the other non-poisonous plants not get eaten. I mean, there's so many different functions that all the plants have in their equilibrium or whatever, in their role, that we can assume that everything was good. We messed it up. I think that's a logical next step. So I think we've done pretty well at debunking the friendly atheist here, and point out that, sir, you need to read some more books. And a lot of this is just from the top of our heads. I don't think we studied this long and this and that. So anything else you want to add, David?
Yeah, I had one other thought on this, and that's I don't know if he thinks that like the author of Genesis was stupid, but like he seems to think the author of Genesis
He seems to think that the author of Genesis was just this utter imbecile. I mean,
right, like that he did not think it through, so he didn't like think about that like the sun is a light, but we've already got light before that, and like none of this was in his head or anything. Now here's the thing: if you could write in that world, and the farther back you go, and by all counts, Genesis is old literature. The farther back you go, the lower the literacy rate goes. If you could write, you had an education. You were like, by the standards of your time, you were intelligent. So the author of Genesis is not an idiot. He's not a buffoon, all right? You could think he's wrong on stuff, but it's not like there's just these basic errors that he just didn't think about that. No, he was an intelligent guy. He had a purpose for what he was writing. And, by trying to fit him into a box that he doesn't fit, then, you can make it look silly if you want, but that's just not a correct representation of who this guy was.
All right. Evan, just one about 10-second closing thought here.
Yeah, I think that this really, watching this guy's video, it really showed me that we need to, it's important that we have a correct understanding of inspiration and that, because if you think that, for example, if you think Genesis just fell from the sky, and that it's supposed to be describing everything that you would see on a scientific program, then if that's not what God intended, but you presuppose that, if God wanted to accommodate his message to an ancient audience and use some of the scientific lingo of their day and some of the word pictures of their day, like a solid dome sky and stuff, then you might think the Bible is in error, but it's really not. In order to know whether the Bible is in error, I wrote a blog post responding to an email recently talking about this very thing. We need to answer the question, what counts as an error? And if we have mistaken ideas of what the Bible is supposed to be and what it's supposed to be saying and how we even got it in the first place, then we might come away with a shattered faith that's not warranted. We need to think better about how we got this thing called the Bible.
Well, thank you very much, Evan. We appreciate you being here, hanging out with us in this PORA Raw episode. David, Next week, or this week, we got another debate. I don't know if you want to come in on it or not. Titus wanted to do it with us. Yes, Titus is going to come back for a debate here we're going to have with Jordan and my friend Mike Jones. So stay tuned for that. Everybody, this is Proselytize or Apostatize Raw, and we will see you next time.